there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle, a human rights struggle, or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations.
And bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary.
Hello family, welcome to We Charge Colonialism. WCC, we're an organization that is seeking the decolonization of African communities in the United States. And if you're interested in joining that movement, you can send us an email at wechargecolonialism@gmail.com, or the best option is to submit a membership application at wechargecolonialism.org. So what I want to talk about in relation to our mission, WCC, yes, we are an organization that focuses on the decolonization of communities in the United States, but our prime focus is also a connection to the global Pan-Africanist struggle. That means that we do not think that we're separate in our fight. We do not think that we're alone in our fight. We do not think that Africans who move from outside of the United States to America are not a part of our fight. That means that we recognize that we are part of a global Pan-Africanist struggle. And things like that need to be emphasized, because more and more we see the movements that are arising trying to cause a divide, not just a divide in as far as a physical divide, but a mental divide between you and your African identity and you in relation to your African brothers and sisters. Now, a lot of these people pretend that this divide is to our benefit without actually backing that up. What I mean is that what time in our history has being connected to the Pan-Africanist struggle diminished our fight? And at what time in our history has the United States government, who has been adverse to African people in the United States, not shown to be apprehensive of the thought of Africans uniting in a global Pan-Africanist struggle? What you'll find is that that's never been the case. For example, J. Edgar Hoover is said to have said that the biggest threat to the United States is Negro unity. That's the words he used at the time. And you look back further than that, there's been a consistent behavior of how racist institutions react to try to cause a divide between Africans in the United States, Africans who are descended from slavery, or Africans who are descended from colonialism. These things are very intentional, and they really profit the white supremacist system. Common sense says that when you have numbers that back you up, common sense says that when you have multiple fronts inside of a war, that is the ultimate threat to the system. Anyone who tells you that having one front in a battle against global white supremacy is trying to deceive you, or themselves have been deceived. Let's think just about common sense. When we look at the history of Africans who were brought to the United States, the implication of slavery was that we have to keep these people dumb, we have to keep them unknowledgeable, we have to keep them ignorant. Not to say this is what they were, but that was the agenda of the white slave master, that you not be an intelligent person. And a part of that is a necessary agenda to suppress your cultural expression, could suppress your cultural identity. Essentially, the plot is to make you think that your history began in slavery. You do not have a history prior to slavery. You did not create anything. You did not create a civilization. Nothing can be attributed to you. You did not found an empire. You did not have independence of mind, independence of thought. You have always been someone who needed to be civilized. Now, once they convinced the slaves or enslaved Africans that they were of that nature, it was a lot easier to enslave them, which is why the campaign in the United States was so severe, because they had to put these people inside of a position where they were going to be willing to be a slave to the system and not fight back. And that required a lot of deculturization. It required a lot of brainwashing, and that's why we have the result that we have today, where Africans are sure that nothing compares to their identity in America. Africans are sure that their ultimate salvation is going to be given to them by a white man or a white woman. Africans are completely enamored with the idea of staying connected to a system that has oppressed them. It's all a scheme to keep you separated, not just from the global Pan-Africanist struggle, but separated from your own identity, because it's a lot easier to enslave you that way. Now, why am I saying this? One of WCC's initiatives, if you've been following WCC, you know that one thing that we're pushing is for recognition of Africans in the United States by the African Union, which ties directly into the fight to decolonize our communities. You may say, how does that tie into it? The African Union is a separate institution, or the African Union has its own problems. That is true. The African Union certainly has its own problems. The African Union certainly exemplifies a lot of the global white supremacist system. And the African Union, the countries of the African Union, most of them are completely occupied by foreign interests. We all know that, right? But what we also have to understand is that there is power and global solidarity. And if we're not necessarily aligning with the leaders of the countries, many of whom are puppets, we have to align with the people of the countries. We have to align with our African brothers and sisters, the everyday working class African who is being exploited by a capitalist system. Now, again, this is a prime example of something that is a direct threat to the global system of white supremacy. Anytime when you see the Africans of the world coming together, finding commonality in our struggle, that is something that is going to make white supremacy nervous. And trust me, it's been very nervous lately. More and more, you're starting to see new leaders arise, new organizations arise, new movements arise, where they're not just identifying themselves as Haitian or just identifying themselves as Nigerian, but they're saying that we are African and that we are part of a global struggle. So therefore, WCC, we really feel like it's important to get recognition in the African Union. And if the African Union proves unwilling or unable to do these things, then guess what? We always have the means to look for alternative institutions, particularly in relation to the global grassroots African movements that exist on the continent. Don't think that because this one institution that exists, that another institution cannot be fomented. However, that does not stop us from pushing the initiative, and it certainly does not stop us from raising global awareness of the fact that this is something that is essential to not just Africans in the US, but Africans globally, to have a global recognition of the fact that we are being colonized by the United States, the same oppressive government that is colonizing African people in multiple jurisdictions, multiple states, multiple countries. Now, one of the first initiatives that we're pushing towards this goal has been led by Brother Kanata. He is attempting to get an AU passport. So there's an organization that has agreed to sponsor us if we can get a certain amount of signatures from African people, signifying that we are interested in an AU passport. Now, Brother Kanata is going to be on the African Esquire channel. He will give you more details on this project. But essentially, we're forming a coalition and calling for all Pan-Africanist organizations, particularly those who are based or have extensions in the United States, who can unite with us on this issue. Because how do you get recognition as a nation if you're just going as one organization? To me, the ultimate way is to have multiple Pan-Africanist organizations under one umbrella. So that is what we're doing. One of the organizations that we've been working with is BAIO. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. But the goal is that we really push this initiative, that we get we have a certain amount of signatures. I don't have the exact amount on my mind exactly right now, but we have a certain amount of signatures that we're trying to get to show the African Union that we're serious. Because we know that there's a willingness on the part of the African Union to include Africans inside of the struggle that they have separately. We know there's a willingness to align the Black Lives Matter movement, for example, to different movements that are going on in the continent of Africa. I'm not sure if you've seen, but the president of South Africa was calling for the Security Council of the United Nations to allow African representation for the permanent members of the United Nations. And if you didn't see, one of the things that he brought up in relation to that call is the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, we in our mind in America, you might say the Black Lives Matter movement has nothing to do with Africans joining the Security Council. So, where do you get that relation? Of course, in America, we relate the Black Lives Matter movement to calls against police brutality, and particularly in the instance of individual murders of African people. However, you have to understand that the message although it's not the strongest message, you might prefer Black Power. I personally prefer Black Power, but even so, the message Black Lives Matter does pertain to Africans everywhere in the world, because everywhere in the world we're the most killed, the ones experiencing the most environmental racism, the ones who are experiencing the most genocidal acts. It's always us. So if you have a call for Black Lives Matter in the United States, that's an easy one to grapple onto if you're an African people anywhere. So that's what's been happening in Africa. We've seen a lot of people surrounding the issue of George Floyd join the call for Black Lives Matter. I've seen also in Zimbabwe, there was Zimbabwe Lives Matter. The point I'm trying to make is we see that there is a willingness to align globally with what we're dealing with in the U.S., and there should also be a willingness on our part to align on the anti-colonial struggle on a global scale. But the next move that we have to make is showing a willingness to separate mentally from our identity as being only the property of the United States, but of being a people who are sovereign. So the title of this video, and it's kind of weird to say the title at this point, but the title or the intention behind this video was, why do we look to Africa? A lot of people don't understand Pan-Africanism. A lot of people think it's crazy. Why are you looking at Africa when Africa's so broken? Why are you looking at Africa when Africa's so broke? But when you understand that every single issue in Africa pertaining to colonialism, pertaining to poverty, pertaining to exploitation, every single issue is attributable to the same people who are oppressing us. So if that's the case, what was happening in Africa prior to that type of interference? What was the continent dealing with prior to that level of occupation? Well, we know that it was not an impoverished continent. We know that it was a people who had everything that they need. And still to this day, Africa is the richest continent in the earth. So we know that it is not what they tell us it is. It's not broke. It's not broken. Instead, it's occupied. Instead, it's under foreign influence. And that is the same foreign influence that is many times complicit in our own demise. Trust me, when Africans in the United States rise up, this just doesn't affect the United States. That affects the colonists in every single jurisdiction. That's why you see things like the Zionist movement coming out against free African liberation. That's why you've seen them, for example, coming out against the South Africans in Azania who were asserting their right to sovereignty. That's why you see them coming out against Black liberation, even though you would think they have nothing to do with it. But guess what? They're part of a global white supremacist system, and that system is one that requires conspirators on every single sphere of the globe to agree on the agenda of exploitation of African people. So why do we look to Africa? We look to Africa, first of all, because it's the motherland. It's where all of us originate from. Even if you don't intend to repatriate to Africa, and I will say, I'm an advocate of, if you do not plan to repatriate back to Africa, that you find an African nation to repatriate back to, whether that be a nation in the Caribbean or some nation that maybe I'm not aware of. The reason being, when you're in enemy territory, it's not reasonable, in my personal opinion, to believe that you will at any point not be in enemy territory unless the power system is no longer the system that exists. And that's a lot to put your bet on. But I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening anytime soon in the U.S. I don't see a time where I'll be safe as an African person in the United States. Now, we might see repatriation. Well, how would I repatriate? Where do I go? I have so much African ancestry. I don't even know where to go. Well, those are things that you figure out on your own. You visit Africa. Do not buy the notion that every single country in Africa is poor or destabilized. I promise you, many countries in Africa or areas of countries in Africa, you probably have a better quality of life than you have in America. But of course, you make your own plans. You do your own building. You make your own decisions about what is it that I need to do what I think is necessary. However, if you do not wish to repatriate, and again, that's my personal thing to advocate for, but if you do not wish to do that, then guess what? You should have the option of being protected by your people standing in solidarity with you whenever the oppressive forces do wage war on you. Because again, I don't think that staying inside of the jurisdictions of white supremacy, you're going to be exempt from displays of violence. All of this to say that we have to look to Africa because Africa is essential to our freedom wherever we are. If Africa is allowed to be colonized, do you think that you're not allowed to be colonized? An entire continent of black people, if that is allowed to happen, is they allowed to be exploited? Do you think that has no effect on you? You don't think that it's okay to exploit a people whenever they're exploited globally? You don't think that it's okay to wage violence against that people whenever violence is waged on them globally? Well, maybe you say, no, I don't think that. Well, let's think in reverse. We know that Europeans are the ones that control the power, that Europeans are the ones that are sovereign, the Europeans are the ones who are essentially the major colonists of black people. Tell me a place anywhere in the world where it's okay to see a European killed the way that George Floyd was killed. Tell me a place anywhere in the world where it's okay to see a genocide against Europeans the same way that you saw the Rwandan genocide in the 90s. Tell me a place in the world where it's okay to see Europeans put off at sea that were trying to immigrate, put off at sea on boats without motors and essentially sent to drown at sea. Tell me any place in the world where that is okay. It's not okay, right? But that's because of the European structure is built to protect their people globally. And we similarly need to have an African structure that does that for ourselves. So why do we look to Africa? Because Africa is essential to the liberation of every single African person, no matter where you are. And in the same way, the liberation of Africans who are not on the continent of Africa is essential to the liberation of Africa. The fact that Haiti is under occupation, Jamaica is under occupation, Barbados, every single country outside of Africa that is a black country, Brazil, even though Brazil is not an entirely black country, it might as well be because I believe it's the first or second largest African population outside of the continent of Africa. Every single place where we are, don't think that abuse is separate from the African continent. Which is why Pan-Africanism is Pan-Africanism. It's not just Africa focused. It's focused on Africans wherever we are. So I hope we got the point. What I'm saying is why we start focused on Africa, because Africa is essential to our liberation. And if you are someone who wants to join that fight for liberation of African people, again, WCC, we're primarily focused on what's going on in the United States, but we stand in solidarity with the Pan-Africanist movement. And at some point, we do hope to see a close relationship between what's going on in other places. But if you're someone based in the US and you say, you know what, I really want to have a part of that movement, we welcome you to join. If you don't want to necessarily join to be a member, we welcome you to be a part of the general community. Regardless, stay focused, stay organized. If you're not in an organization, doesn't have to be WCC, join an organization, because that's the only way that we're going to do anything to affect what is going on with our people, not just on a global scale, but also on a domestic scale. So that is all I have for you guys. Please look out for Brother Kanata's video. The petition will be posted down below. I ask every single person, please sign this petition. It literally takes 1 minute. And if you can even do this, after you sign it, share it on social media. At most, that will take 2 minutes, and I'm being very generous because, let's be realistic, it probably takes 30 seconds to do both. Share it, push it, understand that we're not just doing this for us, we're doing this for you, we're doing this because we want our people to have representation outside of these borders, we want our people to have global presence, and we want the plight of Africans in America to be known every single place where we are, where African people are rather. So, and that is all I have for this video, and I will see you guys in the next video. The Justice Bank. So what is the Justice Bank? I've talked before about the fact that we were trying to do a bail project, but we ended up deciding to do a mutual aid fund. The Justice Bank initiative will essentially take members, and if you would pay a very low monthly membership fee. We're going to keep it low on purpose because we are servicing a people who are the most disenfranchised in this country, the most under attack, and it's not reasonable to expect that there's that someone could pay $30 a month, $50 a month, whenever you are of that group. Now, when you become a member, we're going to have a trial period, maybe say after 3 or 6 months, whatever, you are eligible to petition us for help with your expenses. Now, what type of people who are targeted from the prison industrial complex, what type of people would be eligible? Well, because we're doing a mutual aid society, that would be democratic. What we mean is that if you are a member of the Justice Bank, you would have a say in what types of, let's say, charges or offenses that you want to be covered under the Justice Bank. The idea is that all of us are putting our money in collectively because we are a target of the prison industrial complex. Every single day that we walk out, you as a Black person, you are seen as a criminal in this country, and that is a fact. And we want to offer a type of protection for our people. And almost like an insurance policy, honestly. That if you do have some type of run-in with the law, if you do have a charge, a criminal charge, that you can count on a mutual aid society to help you and assist you with those types of charges.
Nowhere in the world incarcerates as much as we do. We've seen extremely high rates of exposure to the criminal justice system for African American men with very low levels of schooling. So if we think about Black men who were born in the late 1970s and who are growing up through the American prison boom of the 1980s and the 1990s, the chances that they're going to serve time in state or federal prison if they dropped out of high school is about 70%. So going to prison for that group of Black men with very low levels of schooling, that's become a normal life event. And that's really only happened in the last 10 years. We're at this point now where there's about 1.2 million African American children with a parent who's incarcerated. That's about 1 in 9.